I learned very young that love does not always arrive wrapped in warmth. Sometimes it comes quietly, unnoticed, and unpaid for. In our family, my sister Alina was the voice everyone heard, the presence that filled rooms and demanded attention. I was the silence that followed after useful, dependable, invisible. Alina was praised for her dreams, her ambition, her boldness. I was praised for being understanding. When she failed, it was because the world was unfair. When I succeeded, it was because I was lucky. Slowly, without anyone ever saying it out loud, I became the child who required nothing, and therefore deserved nothing. Our father noticed more than people believed. He was not blind, just tired. Years of business battles and family expectations had worn him thin, and by the time illness crept into his bones, he no longer had the strength to correct old mistakes. When the doctors gave him timelines instead of treatments, Alina cried loudly and left early. I stayed. I stayed when the house smelled of medicine and fear. I stayed when his hands shook too badly to hold a glass of water. I learned how to speak gently without sounding pitiful, how to clean wounds without flinching, how to listen when words disappeared and only breathing remained. At night, when the world slept, he would watch me with eyes heavy with thoughts he never voiced. Sometimes his lips parted as if he wanted to say something important, but the moment passed. Silence became our language, deep, heavy, and honest. Alina visited often enough to be seen. She brought flowers and stories, posed for pictures beside his bed, and reminded everyone how hard this was for her. When she left, the room felt lighter and lonelier all at once. "You're so good at this," she once said casually, handing me her coat. "I could never do what you do." I smiled, because that was my role, but as weeks turned into months, I realized something painful and true. Love measured by effort is never mistaken by the dying. Father knew who stayed, he knew who listened, and though he never said the words, something in the way he squeezed my hand told me he was writing a different ending, one that no one else saw coming. And I would soon learn that the quietest love leaves the loudest echo. The day of the will reading arrived wrapped in gray skies and heavier expectations. The city moved as it always had, indifferent to the fact that a family was about to break apart in a quiet office downtown. I arrived early, not out of respect for tradition, but because I had nowhere else to be. Grief leaves a lot of empty time behind. Alina arrived 15 minutes late, dressed in black that looked too polished for morning. Her heels clicked confidently across the marble floor, echoing her certainty. She hugged me tightly, her arms stiff, her perfume overwhelming. "Whatever happens," she whispered near my ear, "will be fine." It sounded less like comfort and more like a warning. The attorney's office felt frozen in time. Dark wood, framed certificates, shelves heavy with old promises. We sat across from one another as the attorney adjusted his glasses and opened a thick folder bearing our father's name. My hands rested calmly in my lap, though my heart beat loudly enough to feel exposed. He began reading. To Alina, the words flowed smoothly. Shares, properties, investments, assets acquired over decades. With every sentence, her posture straightened, her lips pressing together in satisfaction she barely bothered to hide. She glanced at me once, her eyes flickering with something sharp and triumphant. Then the attorney paused. He cleared his throat and spoke my name. The room seemed to hold its breath. Before he could continue, Alina turned fully toward me, her voice soft but deliberate, perfectly aimed to wound. "This is what you deserve." Her words landed heavier than any insult I had known. They carried years of quiet judgment every time I was overlooked. Every sacrifice dismissed as obligation rather than love. Around us, the air shifted. Even the attorney looked uncomfortable, his pen hovering above the paper. I lowered my gaze, not because I felt small, but because I felt suddenly very tired. People often confuse silence with weakness. They mistake stillness for defeat. The attorney continued, reading something brief, something intentionally vague. It sounded final, empty. Alina exhaled in satisfaction. I felt nothing, no anger, no shock, just a strange calm, like the moment before a storm breaks. Because in that silence, I remembered Father's hand squeezing mine late one night, his grip stronger than his failing voice. I remembered the look in his eyes, steady, knowing, certain. And as the attorney closed the folder, I understood something Elena never had. Some stories don't reveal their truth until the very last sentence. Just as Elena reached for her purse, already preparing to leave with her victory neatly folded into her confidence, the attorney lifted his hand. "One moment," he said calmly. The room stilled. Elena paused mid-step, her smile frozen, irritation flashing across her face. "Is there a problem?" The attorney adjusted his glasses and reopened the folder, this time removing a thinner packet of documents sealed with a red tag. His movements were deliberate, careful, like a man handling something fragile and dangerous at the same time. "There is an addendum," he said, "a private trust amendment created 6 months prior to Mr. Alden's passing." Elena laughed once, sharp and dismissive. "Why wasn't that mentioned earlier?" "Because," the attorney replied evenly, "your father requested that it be read last." My heart beat faster, though my expression did not change. I had learned long ago how to keep my emotions where others could not see them. The attorney began reading. "This trust applies under a single condition," he said, his voice steady, "that the beneficiary named remained primary caregiver during Mr. Alden's final months, without compensation, authority, or expectation of inheritance." Elena's smile faded. He lifted his eyes and looked directly at me. The condition was fulfilled. The words landed like a quiet explosion. Elena stepped forward. "That's absurd. I visited. Everyone knows that." The attorney nodded politely. "Yes, you visited. Medical records, hospice logs, and signed caregiver statements confirm who remained." He slid a stack of papers across the table, forms I recognized, signatures I remembered guiding with trembling hands. Then came the assets, private accounts Elena had never known existed, the family home signed over entirely, intellectual property rights father had hidden from public business filings, and finally, full authority over the primary estate trust. Elena's face drained of color. "This isn't fair," she whispered. The attorney's voice softened, but his words did not. "Your father anticipated that reaction. He removed a final envelope, a personal letter," he said, to be read aloud. My breath caught as he unfolded the paper. "To my children, one of you asked for everything. One of you gave me peace. Wealth can be divided. Love cannot be faked. I chose accordingly." The silence that followed was absolute. Elena sank back into her chair, the weight of truth pressing down harder than any accusation. I didn't look at her. For the first time, I didn't have to. I expected to feel victorious as the attorney finished speaking. I expected anger to finally find its voice, or satisfaction to bloom where pain had lived for so long. Instead, what settled inside me was something quieter relief, heavy, cleansing, and long overdue. Elena remained seated, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the documents that had rewritten her certainty. She looked smaller now, stripped of the confidence that once defined her. For a moment, I felt the urge to comfort her. Old habits die slowly, but some lessons are not meant to be softened. The attorney closed the folder and stood. "That concludes the reading," he said gently. "If there are no further questions." Elena looked at me then. Really looked. Not as the reliable shadow she had always known, but as someone she no longer understood. Her voice cracked. "You planned this?" I shook my head. "No," I replied quietly. "I lived it." Those words settled between us like a final truth neither of us could undo. Outside, the sky had cleared. Sunlight filtered through the office windows, warm and unexpected. I gathered my coat slowly, giving myself time to breathe in the moment, not as revenge, but as release. Weeks passed. I moved back into the family home, not to reclaim power, but to make peace. I donated Father's medical equipment to a hospice center, funded a caregiver support program in his name, and sold what I didn't need. Wealth felt different when it arrived without bitterness. Lighter, cleaner. Elena and I spoke once more. She called late one evening, her voice hollow. I didn't know he felt that way. I closed my eyes. He knew. I said, "That was enough." She didn't argue. The greatest revenge, I learned, is not watching someone fall, but rising so completely they can no longer reach you. I built a life that didn't revolve around proving my worth. I traveled, I rested, I laughed without apology. Sometimes, late at night, I thought of father, of his quiet eyes, of the trust he placed in silence. In honoring him, I finally honored myself, and that was the ending he had written all along.